Welcome back to True Crime Continent, where we explore the darkest corners of criminal history across the globe. I'm your host, Olivia, and today we're heading to the scorching desert city of Phoenix, Arizona. But before we dive into today's chilling story, if you're enjoying our deep dives into the criminal mind, hit that subscribe button and make sure you turn on those notifications so you never miss an episode. Trust me, you'll want to be here for every single case we uncover. Picture this. It's the summer of 2006, Phoenix, Arizona. The temperature outside is climbing past 110 degrees Fahrenheit, but the heat isn't what's keeping residents awake at night. No. It's something far more sinister, something that lurks in the shadows, something that strikes without warning, turning everyday activities into death traps. Imagine you're washing your car at a self-service car wash. You're on the phone with someone you love. Broad daylight, people around. You feel safe. But should you? Or maybe you're a young woman, just 19 years old, returning home from dinner with her boyfriend and his family. You pull into your apartment complex parking lot. Your keys are in your hand. Home is just steps away. You never make it inside. Picture a mother of two, a preschool teacher, waiting at a bus stop after a Christmas party, excited to get home. She's thinking about the holidays, about her students, about her family. She has no idea these are the last moments of her life. For nearly a year, one man turns the Phoenix metro area into his personal hunting ground. 9 people murdered, 15 women and girls sexually assaulted, countless lives shattered, families destroyed, a community paralyzed with fear. And all the while, he was hiding in plain sight. A married construction worker with a friendly smile who meticulously cared for his lawn. This isn't just another serial killer story. This is a tale of 2 simultaneous serial killers terrorizing the same city at the same time. This is a story of investigative failures, crucial DNA evidence that sat untested for months, and a crime spree so brutal, so random, that an entire city was brought to its knees. This is the story of the Baseline Killer. To understand the Baseline Killer, we have to go back, way back, to September 6, 1964, when Mark Goudeau was born in a Phoenix neighborhood near 12th Street and Southern Avenue. Mark was the second youngest of 13 children. 13! Can you imagine that household? His father, Willie, worked as a lot attendant for car dealers on Camelback Road. His mother, Alberta, was a maid. According to court records, they eventually divorced. Now, here's where things get complicated, because even within the Goudeau family, the story of Mark's childhood is disputed. Some siblings describe an idyllic, peaceful upbringing. His older brother Oscar told reporters that their childhood was uneventful, even idyllic at times. He claimed there was no violence in the house. But court records tell a very different story. They paint a picture of a family plagued by drug and alcohol abuse. At least 6 of the 13 Goudeau children became felons. At least 4 did prison time. One older sister stated that alcoholism ran rampant in the family and that the children were verbally abused by their father, Willie, who was described as strict and, by some accounts, verbally abusive. In 1976, when Mark was 12 years old, his mother, Alberta, died. 12 years old. Think about that. Your mother dies, you're in a household of 13 children, your father is struggling, and suddenly the older siblings have to become parents. Mark moved in with an older sister in Tempe a few years after his mother's death, trying to find some semblance of stability in the chaos. At Corona del Sol High School in Tempe, Mark found something he was good at: football. He played for the school team, though he never quite reached the level of accomplishment that his older brother Michael achieved on the field. Sports gave him structure, gave him identity, gave him something to hold on to. But even that wasn't enough. Mark dropped out of high school, just a few credits shy of graduation. Here's the thing that chills me to the bone. Mark Goudeau's violent tendencies emerged early, really early. On November 7th, 1982, Mark was just 18 years old. He and one of his brothers were arrested for raping a young woman. But here's the kicker. No charges were pursued, no prosecution, no consequences, just nothing. What if charges had been filed? What if Mark had faced justice then? Would the nightmare that was about to unfold have been prevented? We'll never know. In 1976, he was charged with trespassing. The following year, driving under the influence. Mark himself later admitted to problems with cocaine and alcohol, often blaming his criminal behavior on substance abuse. But substance abuse doesn't turn someone into a serial killer. It might lower inhibitions, but it doesn't create the darkness that was growing inside Mark Goudeau. August 1989. This is where Mark Goudeau's life takes a turn into undeniable violence. He was charged with abducting a woman named Darlene Fernandez, brutally raping her and bludgeoning her, beating her head with a barbell until she was barely conscious. Think about that level of violence, a barbell, against a woman's head, over and over again. Mark's defense? He claimed she consented to oral sex with him and that 2 other men were responsible for the rape and attack. Classic deflection, classic denial, but the evidence didn't lie. In 1990, Mark Goudeau was convicted. He received 15 years for the kidnapping and 21 years for armed robbery. The charges were related but occurred around the same time. The rape charge? Prosecutors dropped it as part of a plea deal. He pleaded down to aggravated assault. This decision, this prosecutorial choice, would have devastating consequences later. Why? Because when Mark was released from prison in 2004, after serving 13 years of his sentence, he wasn't required to register as a sex offender. The rape charge had been dropped. On paper, he wasn't a sexual predator. He was just a violent offender on parole. Mark Goudeau walked out of prison in 2004. He was 40 years old. He'd spent more than a decade behind bars. You'd think that would change a man, right? That he'd have learned something, that he'd want to stay free, rebuild his life, stay out of trouble. Mark got a job as a construction worker. He married a woman named Wendy Carr, who by all accounts adored him. Neighbors described him as friendly, as a man who took meticulous care of his lawn. He seemed normal, reformed even. But beneath that facade, something dark was stirring. Something that had been waiting, festering, growing stronger during those years in prison. Mark Goudeau wasn't reformed. He was just getting started. August 6th, 2005. It's a warm evening in Phoenix. 3 teenage girls are walking home from a pool party, laughing, talking about their day. They're just 12 years old. Children. They're walking near a church at 7202 South 48th Street in the Baseline Road area of Phoenix. Suddenly, a man appears. He has a gun. He forces all 3 girls behind the church. 2 of them, just 2 12-year-old girls, were molested that night at gunpoint. The third was spared, but the trauma of witnessing it would haunt her forever. This was the first known crime of what would become the Baseline Killer spree. But at the time, police didn't know they were dealing with a serial offender. It was logged as a sexual assault. Horrific, yes, but isolated. Or so they thought. 8 days later, on August 14th, another attack. Another woman sexually assaulted and robbed. The pattern was forming, but law enforcement hadn't connected the dots yet. September 5th, 2005. Shortly after midnight, a young woman named Georgia Thompson pulls into the parking lot of her apartment complex in Tempe. She's 19 years old, fresh-faced, with thick brown hair and sparkling blue eyes. She'd only been living in Arizona for a couple of months, having moved from her hometown of Post Falls, Idaho, with dreams of becoming a lawyer. That night, she'd been out to dinner with her boyfriend and his parents. A nice evening. Normal. Safe. She was probably thinking about her future, about her studies, about the life she was building in Arizona. Georgia parked her car. Her keys were in her hand. Home was just steps away. She never made it. The next morning, Georgia Thompson's body was found in the parking lot. She'd been shot once in the back of the head at close range. Her shirt was pulled up. Her pants were unbuttoned. Her keys were still clutched in her hand, and her arm was positioned across her eyes, as if trying to shield herself from what was happening. The inscription on her orange t-shirt read, "Better luck next time." The irony is devastating. Georgia's mother, Rebecca Thompson, would later testify in court through sobs. "I kept thinking they made a mistake, not my baby. I didn't want her out of my sight, and now I have to wait an eternity to see her again." But here's where the investigation takes a frustrating turn. A career criminal from Kentucky named James Duane Mullins, while being interviewed on a burglary case, suddenly confessed to killing Georgia Thompson. He claimed she tried to rob him outside a Scottsdale strip club where she worked. There was just one problem. Georgia's body was found almost 10 miles away at her apartment complex in Tempe. The story didn't add up. But for months, Tempe police detective Susan Chauville believed Mullins. She pursued the wrong lead, wasting valuable time and resources, while the real killer continued his rampage. At Goudeau's eventual trial, Detective Chauville would tearfully apologize for her mistakes, but apologies don't bring victims back. September 15th, 2005. Another sexual assault. September 20th, 2005. This one would eventually become crucial to solving the case, but at the time, no one knew. Two sisters were walking home from a Phoenix City park at night. One of them was visibly pregnant, 6 months along. Imagine the vulnerability, the terror. A man approached them with a gun. He forced them into nearby bushes and ordered them to remove their clothing. The younger sister was sexually assaulted while the man pointed his gun at her pregnant sister's abdomen. Think about that. The psychological torture of watching your sister being violated while a gun is aimed at your unborn child. But the attacker did something that would eventually be his undoing. He was meticulous, calculated. He told the women not to look at his face. He used dirt to try to wipe away saliva evidence from one of the victims. He wore a condom during the assault. But DNA is persistent. DNA doesn't lie. And DNA was collected from the scene, though it would sit untested for far too long. September 28th, another sexual assault and robbery. November 3rd, a woman was abducted at gunpoint outside restaurants at 2950 North 32nd Street in Phoenix. The attacker was wearing a latex Halloween mask. She was forced into her car and sexually assaulted. By this point, law enforcement was starting to see a pattern. Multiple sexual assaults, similar MO. The attacks were happening primarily along Baseline Road in South Phoenix. The media gave the perpetrator a name, the Baseline Rapist. Phoenix was on edge. Women were afraid to go out alone. Parents were terrified for their daughters. But the Baseline Rapist was about to become something far worse. He was about to become the Baseline Killer. December 12th, 2005. A chilly night in Phoenix. 39-year-old Tina Washington, a beloved preschool teacher, attended a Christmas party. She was thinking about the holidays, about her students, about getting home to her family. She was a mother who wore a special ring with 3 birthstones and the phrase, "We love Mom," inscribed on the side. After the party, Tina waited at a bus stop. It was early evening, around 40th Street and Southern Avenue. A seemingly safe situation, public, lit. But safety is an illusion when a predator is hunting. Tina Washington never made it home. Her body was found behind a warehouse in an alley. She'd been shot twice in the head at close range. Her beloved ring, the one her children had given her, was missing. Phoenix homicide detective Alex Feminia arrived at the scene and immediately felt something was wrong. "I've got a weird feeling about this one," he told colleagues. He couldn't have known just how right he was. Tina Washington was Mark Goudeau's second murder victim, though it would be months before anyone connected her death to Georgia Thompson's. The new year brought no relief. If anything, the violence escalated. February 20th, 2006. Romelia Vargas, 38 years old, and her cook, Myrna Palma Roman, 34, were working in their food truck when death came calling. Both women were murdered inside their vehicle. Romelia left behind 4-month-old twins who would grow up without their mother. March 15th, 2006. Liliana Sanchez Cabrera, 20 years old, and Chow Chow, 23, were working at a Japanese restaurant. They were shot and killed. Chow Chow's death appeared to be incidental, wrong place, wrong time. But for Liliana, another young woman with her whole life ahead of her, the nightmare was targeted. Liliana's mother, Juana Sanchez, would later write to the jury, "If I could rip out my heart, I could show my sorrow. It's very difficult to keep on living." March 29th, 2006. Kristen Nicole Gibbons, 26 years old. Shot, dead. Another family shattered. April 10th. This murder was different. Sofia Nunez was killed in her own home, a violation not just of her body, but of her sanctuary. For months, police didn't connect Sofia's murder to the Baseline Killer. It wasn't until ballistics evidence was compared that they realized the same gun, a .380 caliber handgun that was never recovered, had been used in all the murders. By the spring of 2006, Phoenix was in full panic mode. And here's what made it even worse. The Baseline Killer wasn't the only serial killer operating in the city. At the exact same time, 2 other men, Dale Hausner and Samuel Dietman, were conducting their own reign of terror as the serial shooters. They were randomly shooting people from their car, sniping victims in the night. 6 people were killed, 19 others wounded. Can you imagine? 2 separate serial killer cases, same city, same time period. The statistical odds of this happening are astronomical. Serial murder makes up less than 1% of homicides in the United States. But Phoenix had multiple serial killers active simultaneously. On July 28, 2006, London's Daily Mail newspaper ran a headline, "U.S. City in Fear as Two Serial Killers Stalk the Streets." Phoenix residents were terrified. People stopped going out at night. Women traveled in groups, though even that didn't guarantee safety. Remember, the baseline killer had attacked multiple victims at once. Daily activities like washing your car, waiting for a bus, or walking home became potentially deadly. Police held community meetings, distributing a composite sketch based on descriptions from surviving victims. Billboards went up across the city. A $100,000 reward was offered for information leading to an arrest. The sketch of the baseline killer's face was everywhere, staring down from every corner, a constant reminder that a predator was among them. But months passed. The tips led nowhere. The baseline killer remained a ghost. June 29th, 2006. Around 9:30 p.m., Carmen Miranda, a 37-year-old mother of two, pulled into a self-service car wash at 2924 East Thomas Road in Phoenix, just half a block from where previous attacks had occurred, and around the corner from Mark Goudeau's house. Carmen was on her cell phone, talking to her boyfriend while vacuuming her car. This was captured on the car wash's closed-circuit television cameras. Normal evening, routine task, but the baseline killer was watching. In what police would later describe as a blitz attack, a man suddenly appeared, abducted Carmen, and dragged her away. Her boyfriend heard a scream through the phone, then the line went dead. He immediately called police and family members and raced to the scene. But it was too late. Carmen Miranda's body was found about 100 yards away, behind a barber shop. She'd been shot in the head. Like so many of the other victims, her pants were partially pulled down. But this time, the killer had been caught on camera. The surveillance footage spooked him. He knew law enforcement had visual evidence. This would be the baseline killer's last known crime. 9 murders, 15 sexual assaults, 11 kidnappings, numerous armed robberies, 86 felonies committed over the course of 10 months, 33 total victims. The baseline killer's reign of terror had finally ended. But the question remained, who was he? Here's where this case takes an infuriating turn. Because the key to solving it, the DNA evidence that would identify Mark Goudeau, it was sitting in a police storage facility, untested, for 9 months. Let me say that again, 9 months. Remember those 2 sisters who were attacked on September 20th, 2005? One pregnant, both terrorized? DNA had been collected from one of the victims, a swab from her breast. But Phoenix Police Department's lab technology wasn't sophisticated enough to analyze it properly. They needed to send it to the Arizona Department of Public Safety, whose lab had superior technology. But they didn't, not for months. In April 2009, the Times Publications chain in Phoenix published a bombshell story. Phoenix police had possessed the key DNA evidence 9 months before Mark Goudeau's arrest, but failed to analyze it in a timely manner. Think about what this means. Think about the victims who died during those 9 months, while the evidence sat untested. Carmen Miranda, Sophia Nunez, Kristen Gibbons, the 2 restaurant workers, the food truck owners. Could they have been saved? Would they still be alive if the DNA had been tested promptly? These are questions that haunt the victims' families to this day. In fact, several families filed wrongful death lawsuits against the city of Phoenix, arguing that the delay in processing DNA evidence allowed Goudeau to continue killing. The city of Phoenix denied acting negligently. The courts ultimately ruled that police have no obligation to defend specific individuals, a cold legal reality that offers no comfort to the bereaved. But let's talk about how the arrest finally happened. By summer 2006, the Baseline Killer Task Force was desperate. They'd compiled a list of over 100 convicted sex offenders living in the general vicinity of where the attacks occurred. They were working through it methodically, but it was slow going. Here's the thing. Mark Goudeau wasn't on that list. Remember, the rape charge from his 1989 crime had been dropped as part of his plea deal. He wasn't a registered sex offender. He was invisible to this line of investigation. But Mark Goudeau was on parole. He was under supervision by the Arizona Department of Corrections, assigned to the Northeast Parole Office. And in August 2006, parole officers looked at the composite sketch that was plastered all over Phoenix and thought, that looks like Mark Goudeau. They passed his name to the Phoenix Police Department task force. Parole officers searched Goudeau's residence and found a ski mask and a realistic toy handgun. This gave police probable cause to obtain a search warrant. Finally, Phoenix police sent the DNA swabs from the September 20th, 2005 attack on the two sisters to the Arizona Department of Public Safety for analysis. On September 2nd, 2006, DNA analyst Lorraine Heath contacted Phoenix police with a preliminary hit, Mark Goudeau. 4 days later, on September 6, 2006, Mark Goudeau's 42nd birthday, Phoenix police arrested him without incident in front of his home. Initially, he was only charged with the sexual assault of the two sisters, but investigators suspected they had their man for all the Baseline Killer crimes. They just needed to build the case. On October 7, 2006, Phoenix police detective Mike Meislish led a search of Mark Goudeau's home. Meislish had an impeccable reputation. He was the Baseline Killer Task Force's first call, their best crime scene detective. And what he found was damning. In Mark Goudeau's closet, hidden inside one of his shoes, was a ring with 3 birthstones, a ring with an inscription, "We love Mom." It was Tina Washington's ring, the beloved preschool teacher, murdered on December 12, 2005, her children's gift to her, stolen as a trophy by her killer. But that wasn't all. Detective Alex Femenia, the lead detective on the Baseline Killer Task Force, suspected that blood and DNA evidence might be found on Goudeau's shoes. Most of the victims had been shot at close range. Blood spatter was inevitable. During the first search, not all of Goudeau's shoes had been collected. When this oversight was discovered, detectives obtained another search warrant. This time, Meislish methodically collected every pair of shoes Goudeau owned. And Goudeau owned a lot of shoes, the Imelda Marcos of serial killers, someone quipped. Enough footwear for 10 men. Testing revealed DNA from 2 of the murder victims on Goudeau's Nike sneakers. He tried to wash them, but DNA is persistent. You can't wash away blood evidence completely, not with modern forensic technology. Ballistics expert Danny Hamilton testified that the same .380 caliber handgun was used in all 9 murders. The gun itself was never found, but shell casings don't lie. The firing mechanism of every weapon leaves distinctive markings on expended shells. Hamilton could definitively prove that one gun, Mark Goudeau's gun, had been used to execute 9 people. DNA, ballistics, physical evidence, victim identifications. 7 survivors identified Mark Goudeau as their attacker. An eighth identified his voice from a voice lineup. The case against Marc Goudeau was overwhelming. Marc Goudeau faced two separate trials. The first, in September 2007, was for the attack on the two sisters on September 20th, 2005. He was convicted on all 19 charges and sentenced to 438 years in prison. But that was just the beginning. The murder trial, that would come later. On the stand, the surviving victims gave devastating testimony. The sisters described how Goudeau approached them with a gun, forced them into bushes, made them remove their clothing, how he sexually assaulted the younger sister while pointing his gun at her pregnant sister's abdomen, how he told them not to look at his face, how he tried to destroy evidence. The two 12-year-old girls, now 18, testified about their assault, crying on the stand as they relived the August 6, 2005 attack. Families of the murder victims testified, many weeping openly. Rebecca Thompson, Georgia Thompson's mother, showed the jury photos of her beautiful, freckle-faced daughter with thick brown hair and sparkling blue eyes. "I kept thinking they made a mistake. Not my baby," she sobbed. Teresa Washington, Tina Washington's sister, spoke through tears. "I believe in an eye for an eye. He's not going to die the way my sister died." Juana Sanchez, Liliana Sanchez Cabrera's mother, had a friend read her letter to the jury because she was too emotional to speak. If she could rip out her heart, she wrote, she could show them her sorrow. It's very difficult to keep on living. Prosecutors Suzanne Cohn and Patricia Stevens painted Marc Goudeau as a ravenous wolf, driven by a hunger to rape women and kill those who didn't cooperate. He enjoyed the power and dominion he exercised over these victims, Stevens told the jury. He enjoyed the threats of force, the threats of death. Marc Goudeau's defense team faced an uphill battle. How do you defend a man with this much evidence against him? How do you explain away DNA found on victims? How do you justify a victim's ring hidden in your client's shoe? The defense tried several strategies. They questioned the DNA testing methods. They suggested that there might have been multiple killers, not just one. They argued that the sheer number of charges might have swayed the jury into finding Goudeau guilty, even in cases where evidence was weaker. Defense attorney Corwin Townsend pointed out that some of the DNA analysis showed only partial matches. Under cross-examination, DNA analyst Lorraine Heath agreed with this characterization. But then she also testified that it was 360 trillion times more likely that DNA collected from crime scenes came from Goudeau rather than an unrelated black male. 360 trillion to 1. Let that sink in. The defense presented mitigating factors. A clinical and forensic psychologist named Mark Cunningham testified about Goudeau's difficult childhood, his parents' alcohol abuse, his mother dying when he was only 12. Correction, actually 10, according to some testimony. His father being in and out of his life, his older siblings having to assume parenting roles. Cunningham suggested Goudeau likely suffered from fetal alcohol syndrome, had a family history of drug and alcohol abuse, and lacked stability in his home life. He said that while Goudeau had a choice as an adult when it came to committing crimes, he got no choice about what risk factors he was subjected to from childhood to age 6. Defense attorney Corwin Townsend urged jurors to sentence Goudeau to life in prison rather than death. That's where he'll be the rest of his life. A death sentence is as permanent as you can get. But the most shocking moment came when Marc Goudeau decided to address the jury himself, against his lawyer's wishes. After all the testimony, after all the evidence, After hearing from victim after victim, family member after family member, Mark Goudeau stood before the jury and said, "I am no monster. I could look in each and every one of your eyes today and tell you Mark Goudeau is no wolf in sheep's clothing. I do pray that one day you guys learn the truth about this case." No apology, no remorse, no acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused, just denial and deflection. Prosecutor Patricia Stevens seized on this in her closing argument. He and he alone decided how each of these 9 would leave this world, what their last few minutes on this earth would be like. He put them through unspeakable terror, and he ended each and every one of these lives by putting a gun to their head and executing them. And now he asks you for mercy. He asks you for mercy that he never himself showed. On October 31st, 2011, the jury found Mark Goudeau guilty of 67 felony charges, including 9 counts of first-degree murder. They failed to reach a verdict on 1 charge. On 3 counts of robbery and 1 count of kidnapping, he was found not guilty. But on the murders, guilty, all 9 of them. November 30th, 2011, the sentencing phase. This was when the jury had to decide, life in prison or death. In Arizona, the same jury that convicts also decides the sentence in capital cases. These 12 people had heard everything. They'd seen the crime scene photos. They'd listened to the victims. They'd watched family members break down in tears. They'd heard Mark Goudeau claim he was innocent. Now they had to decide if he should live or die. The jury deliberated, and when they returned, their decision was unanimous. Death. 9 times. 1 death sentence for each murder. In addition to the death sentences, Goudeau was sentenced to more than 1,100 years in prison for the 58 non-capital felonies. Over 1,762 years total when combined with his previous 438-year sexual assault trial. As the verdicts were read, Mark Goudeau kept his head down, shaking it periodically, showing little emotion. Outside the courtroom, victims' families expressed relief, though their pain was far from over. "Justice has been served," one family member said, "but it doesn't bring them back." Mark Goudeau is currently housed on death row at Arizona State Prison Complex Iman in Florence, Arizona, awaiting execution. In June 2016, the Arizona Supreme Court unanimously upheld his conviction and 9 death sentences in a 76-page opinion, rejecting all of his appeals. He remains on death row today. Throughout this entire ordeal, there was one person who steadfastly maintained Mark Goudeau's innocence: his wife, Wendy Carr. Wendy, a business consultant who owned her own company, had been married to Mark for 20 years. She described their marriage as perfect. "If there is such a thing as perfect, that was our life. It was idyllic," she told Good Morning America in 2007. She characterized Mark as a good person and lover of life who had turned his life around after being released from prison. She insisted the Phoenix police had arrested the wrong man, that they manipulated the media, that they were desperate for a suspect and targeted Mark because he was black, lived in the area where crimes occurred, and was on parole. "That's an easy target," she said. Wendy even claimed the DNA evidence was wrong. "I can vouch that if you put Mark on parole, you will never see him again," she told the parole board in 2004. She was right about that, but for all the wrong reasons. In 2007, Wendy started a website maintaining Mark's innocence. She insisted that investigators had framed him, that multiple killers were responsible, that the DNA testing was flawed. But as the evidence mounted, as conviction followed conviction, the strain must have been unbearable. In late November 2011, just before Mark's sentencing, Wendy filed for divorce. She called it a legal separation only, saying she would stay by his side as long as I can help him. But the fairy tale marriage she described, the perfect life, it was built on a foundation of lies. Mark Goudeau wasn't a reformed man. He wasn't a good person. He was a serial killer who had fooled even the person closest to him. So what do we make of Mark Goudeau? How does someone go from being a high school football player to one of Arizona's most prolific serial killers? The psychologist will tell you about his childhood trauma, the death of his mother, the alcoholism in his family, the verbal abuse, the lack of stability. And yes, these things matter. Childhood trauma can shape who we become. But millions of people experience trauma and don't become serial killers. Mark Goudeau made choices, deliberate, calculated, evil choices. He chose to approach those three 12-year-old girls on August 6th, 2005. He chose to pull a rifle on them. He chose to victimize two of them. He chose to shoot Georgia Thompson in the back of the head as she tried to get into her apartment. A 19-year-old girl with her whole life ahead of her. He chose to shoot Tina Washington twice in the head and steal the ring her children had given her. A ring he kept as a trophy, hidden in his shoe like some sick memento. He chose to execute restaurant workers, food truck vendors, women waiting at bus stops, women washing their cars. He chose to assault 15 women and girls, some as young as 12. These weren't crimes of passion. These weren't mistakes. This was a predator systematically hunting vulnerable victims for nearly a year. And here's what really gets me. Mark Goudeau had been given a second chance. After serving 13 years for kidnapping, rape, and assault, he was released in 2004. He had the opportunity to rebuild his life. He had a wife who loved him. He had a job. He had his freedom. But within a year of his release, he was attacking children. Within a year, he was killing. Was he always a monster? Or did prison make him worse? Did those 13 years behind bars harden something inside him that was already dark? Or was the darkness always there, just waiting for the right moment to emerge? We'll never really know, because Mark Goudeau has never taken responsibility. He's never shown remorse. He's never admitted what he did. To this day, he maintains his innocence, despite DNA evidence that's 360 trillion times more likely to be his than anyone else's. But let's be real here. Mark Goudeau didn't operate in a vacuum. There were systemic failures that allowed him to continue killing for as long as he did. First, the 1982 rape charge that was never prosecuted. Mark was 18 years old when he and his brother allegedly raped a young woman. If charges had been filed, if he'd been convicted, would his trajectory have been different? Would he have received intervention early? We'll never know. Second, the plea deal in 1990 that dropped the rape charge in exchange for guilty pleas on kidnapping and aggravated assault. This decision meant Mark didn't have to register as a sex offender when he was released. He was invisible to investigators looking specifically at registered sex offenders. Third, and this one is infuriating, the DNA evidence that sat untested for 9 months. 9 months! During which time Mark Goudeau killed at least 6 people, maybe more. The DNA from the September 20th, 2005 attack on the two sisters was collected in September 2005. Mark Goudeau wasn't arrested until September 6, 2006. If that DNA had been tested promptly, say within a month or two, Carmen Miranda would still be alive. She was killed on June 29, 2006, almost 9 months after the DNA was collected. Sofia Nunez, murdered on April 10, 2006. Kristen Gibbons, murdered on March 29, 2006. Liliana Sanchez Cabrera and Chow Chow, murdered on March 15, 2006. Romelia Vargas and Mirna Palma Roman, murdered on February 20th, 2006. 6 people. 6 families destroyed because DNA evidence sat in a storage facility waiting to be tested. The Phoenix Police Department claimed they didn't have the technology to properly analyze the DNA. Fine. But the Arizona Department of Public Safety did. Why didn't they send it immediately? Why did it take 9 months? These are questions that haunt the victims' families. These are questions that led to wrongful death lawsuits. These are questions that expose the cracks in our criminal justice system. Cracks through which Mark Goudeau slipped again and again and again, until 33 people had been victimized and 9 were dead. Remember, Mark Goudeau wasn't the only serial killer terrorizing Phoenix in 2005 and 2006. The serial shooters, Dale Hausner and Samuel Deitman, were conducting their own reign of terror simultaneously. Between May 2005 and August 2006, these 2 men randomly shot at people, animals, and vehicles from their car, treating the streets of Phoenix like their personal shooting gallery. They killed 6 people and wounded 19 others in what they described as a thrill-seeking rampage. Think about how statistically improbable this is. Serial killers account for less than 1% of all murders in the United States. The odds of having 2 separate serial killer cases in the same city at the same time are astronomical. But it happened in Phoenix. Dale Hausner was arrested on July 31, 2006, just over a month before Mark Goudeau. Samuel Deitman was arrested shortly after. In March 2009, Hausner was convicted and sentenced to death. He committed suicide in his cell on June 19, 2013, before his execution could be carried out. Deitman accepted a plea agreement and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The cases were different in methodology, random shootings versus targeted sexual assaults and murders. But the terror they caused was equally real. Phoenix residents didn't know which serial killer might strike next. Going outside at night became a gamble with death. It took comprehensive task forces, hundreds of investigators, thousands of man-hours, and ultimately DNA evidence to bring both sets of killers to justice. It's easy to get lost in the details of the investigation, the trial, the forensics, but we can't forget the real victims here. 9 people murdered. 15 sexually assaulted. Countless family members left to pick up the pieces. Let me tell you about them. Let me make them real for you. Georgia Thompson, 19 years old. She dreamed of becoming a lawyer. She'd only been in Arizona for 2 months when she was murdered. Her mother, Rebecca, still grieves for her baby, waiting for an eternity to see her again. Tina Washington, 39 years old. A beloved preschool teacher. A mother who wore a ring inscribed, "We love Mom," from her children. She was waiting for a bus after a Christmas party when her life ended. Romelia Vargas, 38. and Mirna Palma Roman, 34. Two women working in their food truck trying to make a living. Romelia left behind 4-month-old twins who will never remember their mother's face. Liliana Sanchez Cabrera, 20 years old. Her mother, Juana's heart is still broken. Her sorrow so deep that if she could rip out her heart, she could show it to you. Chao Cho, 23. Wrong place, wrong time. Killed simply because he happened to be at work when Mark Goudeau came hunting. Kristen Nicole Gibbons, 26 years old. A life cut short, dreams unfulfilled. Sofia Nunez, killed in her own home, her sanctuary violated, her life stolen. Carmen Miranda, 37 years old, a mother of two, talking on the phone with her boyfriend while washing her car. A mundane evening task that became her last moments on earth. These weren't just statistics. These weren't just names on a court docket. These were human beings with families, dreams, hopes, futures. They had people who loved them. They had lives that mattered. And then there are the survivors. The 15 women and girls who were sexually assaulted. The two 12-year-old girls who were molested behind a church. The two sisters, one pregnant, who were terrorized at gunpoint. The women who were abducted, violated, traumatized. They survived, yes. But survival comes with its own burdens. PTSD, nightmares, fear, trust issues, thoroughly, the constant what-ifs and if-onlys. Some survivors of sexual assault spend years, even decades, working through their trauma. These are the real casualties of Mark Goudeau's crimes. Not just the dead, but the living who will never be the same. I've covered a lot of serial killer cases on this podcast, and one question always comes up. Why? Why do people like Mark Goudeau do what they do? Psychologists have tried to answer this question for decades. There are theories about childhood trauma, brain abnormalities, genetic predispositions, environmental factors. Some experts believe serial killers are born with certain predispositions that, when combined with traumatic experiences, creates a perfect storm of violence. Others argue it's purely behavioral, that serial killers are made, not born, through a series of escalating choices and experiences. The truth? It's probably both. Nature and nurture. Biology and environment. Predisposition and choice. Mark Goudeau certainly had risk factors. Alcoholic parents, verbal abuse, his mother dying when he was young, siblings who also became criminals, a lack of stability and guidance. These things matter. But, and this is crucial, these things don't excuse what he did. They might explain some of the factors that contributed to his development, but they don't remove his agency. Mark Goudeau chose violence, again and again and again. What strikes me most about Mark Goudeau is his complete lack of remorse. Even in the face of overwhelming evidence, he maintained his innocence. He looked at the families of his victims and said, "I am no monster." He asked for mercy that he never showed to his victims. This is narcissism on a breathtaking scale. This is someone so divorced from empathy, so incapable of seeing the humanity in others, that he can look at the devastation he caused and feel nothing. Or at least, nothing he's willing to acknowledge. There's a concept in psychology called the dark triad. 3 personality traits that often cluster together in people who harm others: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Narcissism is the inflated sense of self-importance. Machiavellianism is the manipulation and exploitation of others for personal gain. Psychopathy is the lack of empathy and remorse. Marc Goudeau exhibits all three. He believed he was smarter than investigators, smarter than the jury. He manipulated his wife Wendy for years, convincing her he was reformed, that he was innocent. And he showed absolutely no empathy for his victims, treating them as objects to be used and discarded. This is what evil looks like. Not a Hollywood monster with fangs and claws, just a regular-looking guy who meticulously mows his lawn and smiles at his neighbors while hiding the darkest of secrets. Today, Marc Goudeau sits on death row at the Arizona State Prison Complex Iman in Florence, Arizona. He's been there since 2011, awaiting execution. Arizona uses lethal injection for executions, though the state has had a controversial history with this method. In 2014, the botched execution of Joseph Wood, who gasped and snorted for nearly 2 hours before dying, led to a de facto moratorium on executions in Arizona. The state struggled to obtain the drugs necessary for lethal injections, as pharmaceutical companies increasingly refused to sell them for execution purposes. In May 2024, Arizona announced it had obtained pentobarbital and was ready to resume executions. Aaron Gunches was executed on April 6, 2023, marking the state's return to capital punishment after an 8-year hiatus. So where does that leave Marc Goudeau? He filed appeals, as all death row inmates do. In June 2016, the Arizona Supreme Court unanimously upheld his conviction and death sentences in a 76-page opinion. They rejected his arguments about ineffective counsel, improper admission of evidence, and juror misconduct. His execution date has not been set. Given the backlog of death row inmates in Arizona and the legal complexities involved, Marc Goudeau could sit in prison for years, possibly decades, before he's executed. Some death row inmates die of natural causes before their executions can be carried out. But make no mistake, barring some extraordinary legal development, Marc Goudeau will die in prison. Whether by execution or old age, he will never walk free again. He spends his days in a small cell, isolated from the general prison population. Death row inmates in Arizona are kept in their cells approximately 23 hours a day, with 1 hour for recreation. They eat alone. They shower alone. They exist in a state of prolonged isolation that some experts consider cruel and unusual punishment. Is this justice? The families of his victims think so. They wanted him to suffer, to experience even a fraction of the fear and pain he inflicted on their loved ones. But can any punishment truly be equivalent to the crimes he committed? Can any amount of suffering balance the scales? These are philosophical questions without easy answers. So what did we learn from the baseline killer case? What lessons can we take from this tragedy? First, the importance of timely evidence processing. The 9-month delay in testing crucial DNA evidence potentially allowed Marc Goudeau to kill 6 more people. This is unacceptable. Police departments need adequate funding, staffing, and technology to process evidence quickly. DNA testing should be prioritized in cases involving serial offenses. In the years since the baseline killer case, Phoenix has improved its protocols. But across the country, crime labs are often understaffed and overwhelmed. Rape kits sit untested for years. DNA evidence languishes in storage. This has to change. Second, the importance of connecting the dots. For months, investigators didn't realize they were dealing with a serial offender. The attacks seemed random, spread across different jurisdictions, different victim types. It wasn't until they started comparing evidence that patterns emerged. Today, we have better databases, better communication between agencies, better technology for linking cases. But we still need humans to ask the right questions, to see the connections, to trust their instincts. Remember Detective Alex Faminia standing at Tina Washington's crime scene saying, "I've got a weird feeling about this one." That instinct was right. We need to listen to those instincts while also following the evidence. Third, the danger of plea deals that drop sex crime charges. Mark Goudeau's 1990 conviction should have required him to register as a sex offender. But the rape charge was dropped as part of a plea deal, so he wasn't registered. This made him invisible to investigators who were specifically looking at sex offenders in the area. Prosecutors face difficult choices. They want convictions, and plea deals guarantee convictions without the risk of trial. But when we drop sex crime charges for the sake of expediency, we lose valuable information that could prevent future crimes. Fourth, the limits of rehabilitation. Mark Goudeau was supposed to be a success story. He'd served his time, he'd been released on parole. He had a job, a wife, a seemingly normal life. Everyone believed he'd turned a corner. But some people don't change. Some people can't be rehabilitated. This doesn't mean we should give up on rehabilitation as a concept. Most offenders do benefit from it. But we need to be realistic about high-risk offenders, particularly those with histories of sexual violence. And finally, the importance of survivor testimony. 7 women identified Mark Goudeau as their attacker. An 8th identified his voice. These brave women came forward, endured the trauma of testifying, and helped put a serial killer away. We need to support survivors. We need to believe them. We need to make the reporting and prosecution process less traumatizing. Because without their courage, Mark Goudeau might still be free. The baseline killer's crimes didn't just affect his direct victims. They sent ripples through the entire Phoenix community, ripples that are still felt today. Parents became terrified to let their children walk to school alone. Women stopped going out at night. Businesses suffered as people avoided certain neighborhoods. The simple act of washing your car at a self-service car wash became fraught with anxiety. For the Hispanic community in South Phoenix, where many of the crimes occurred, the fear was particularly acute. Some victims were Latinas. The attacks happened in predominantly Hispanic neighborhoods. People wondered if they were being targeted because of their ethnicity, though investigators found no evidence of hate crimes. The 2 simultaneous serial killer cases, the baseline killer and the serial shooters, created a perfect storm of terror. Phoenix became known as a dangerous city, a place where random violence could strike anyone, anywhere, at any time. Real estate values in certain neighborhoods dropped. People moved away. Community events were canceled. The social fabric of South Phoenix was torn. Even after Mark Goudeau's arrest, the healing process was slow. Trust, once shattered, is hard to rebuild. People who lived through that period of terror carry those memories with them. They still look over their shoulders. They still feel a spike of fear when they hear footsteps behind them at night. And for the families of the victims, their lives were irrevocably changed. Birthdays, holidays, graduations, all marked by the absence of their loved ones. Rebecca Thompson will never see her daughter Georgia become a lawyer. Tina Washington's children will never have their mother at their weddings. Romelia Vargas's twins will grow up with only photographs of the mother they'll never know. This is the true cost of serial murder. Not just the lives taken, but the lives forever altered. The ripples spread outward, touching hundreds, thousands of people. They never fully disappear. We started this episode with a question. How does a construction worker who meticulously cares for his lawn become one of Arizona's most prolific serial killers? After spending hours researching this case, after reading thousands of pages of court documents, after listening to survivor testimony and family victim impact statements, I'm not sure I have a satisfying answer. Mark Goudeau is a contradiction. A man who could be charming and friendly to his neighbors while simultaneously hunting and killing strangers. A man who maintained a 20-year marriage while carrying out brutal sexual assaults and murders. A man who claimed to be reformed while stalking his next victim. This is the banality of evil that Hannah Arendt wrote about. Evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like your neighbor. Sometimes it smiles at you. Sometimes it mows its lawn and waves hello. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying lesson of all. The baseline killer case reminds us that evil can hide in plain sight. That the people who do the most harm are often those we'd never suspect. That we can never truly know what darkness lurks in another person's heart. But it also reminds us of human resilience. The survivors who testified, who faced their attacker in court, who refused to let him destroy them completely. The families who found the strength to get out of bed each day despite their grief. The investigators who worked tirelessly to bring a killer to justice. The community that came together in the face of terror. 9 people lost their lives to Mark Goudeau's violence. 15 women and girls were sexually assaulted. 33 total victims. But those victims were not just numbers. They were people. They had names, faces, dreams, families. They mattered. They still matter. Georgia Thompson, Tina Washington, Romelia Vargas, Myrna Palma Roman, Liliana Sanchez Cabrera, Chow Chow, Kristen Nicole Gibbons, Sophia Nunez, Carmen Miranda. Say their names, remember them, because in remembering, we honor them. We ensure that they were more than just victims of a serial killer. They were human beings whose lives had meaning, whose deaths left holes in the world that can never be filled. Mark Goudeau sits on death row today. His fate is sealed. But the scars he left on Phoenix, on the families of his victims, on the survivors who carry their trauma every day, those scars remain. Justice was served, yes. Mark Goudeau will pay for his crimes. But justice doesn't bring back the dead. It doesn't erase the trauma. It doesn't heal all wounds. It's just the best we can do in the face of incomprehensible evil. This has been True Crime Continent. Thank you for listening to this incredibly difficult story. If you or someone you know has been affected by sexual assault or violence, please reach out for help. You're not alone. There are resources available. If this episode impacted you, please leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. We have more stories to tell, more cases to explore, more dark corners of history to illuminate. Remember, evil exists, but so does justice, so does resilience, so does hope. Until next time, stay safe out there.